So, a big welcome to today's topic on critical thinking and education. And we're looking at a sometimes overlooked aspect of critical thinking today, and that is that we are always critical thinking in groups of people, teams of people. You can't easily critically think alone. And this is a challenge in that in education, we have to decide, are we encouraging in teaching students to think alone or in groups? So I asked a teacher before, and they said they hate group work. And I don't know what your experience is with group work. Can anyone think, why do teachers sometimes dislike group work? And it's okay to play together in groups if it's just a more creative time, but you want to get something done. You want to get some poetry done, or you want to get an artwork done, or an engineering project done. And you could do it with individuals, or you could do it with groups. So can I ask Paige and then Gabriella and then others, why do teachers sometimes find group work is a pain?
So I'm just thinking probably for teachers, they probably have a set way of working, and they probably don't want to, incorporate other people's, which I get from experience in high school doing group work. I also hated it.
Wow. You hated it. And why did you hate it?
I don't know. It just got annoying because if you're assigned with, good people, competent people who are quite, did well in school, it was good. But then there were some people who just, slacked off and didn't really participate, and it got quite annoying. But yeah, I like just being in my own space and doing my own work.
And when you're in your own space, you know what's going on. You're in control. But when you're actually relying on others, you're never going to fully know the others. And so there's a loss of control. There's a loss of certainty. There's a lot that's lost in a group, isn't it? So I think you identified that well. Gabriella, what's your experience with group work? Love it or hate it, and why?
I personally hate it. Not that I should say, yeah, look, when it's got something to do with marking, like any form of marks, I don't like it because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I hate having to, the whole thing of managing different people and different expectations other people have. So it's not my favorite. But yeah. I value what it can be, and I do see the purpose and role it does have, but it's not my fave.
Yeah, wow. So that's so interesting. So we've got two down. And Kieran, what's your experience with group work? We got two hating it.
I've done group work in high school and in university before I came to Alpha Christus. And what I've seen is that a lot of the time there's at least one group where people are either dropping out or they're unavailable, and the others have to pick up the slack. And I've seen that completely destroy the marks and the reputation of the entire group. But group work is also, it can be done well. And it's also foundational to teaching students how to operate in the workforce, because half the time you're not doing anything alone when you're at work. You're collaborating with people, you're working as a part of a team, and it's sort of teaching them how to be a team player without having to go and do after school sports and having to go and do extracurricular activities, but it teaches them within the curriculum.
Yeah, so well said. So it's got challenges, but it has some benefits. Alex, and then Sally, if Sally's ready with some comments. What's your experience with group work, and what can we learn from that?
I honestly didn't mind group work up until I was upper high school, because I had pretty good experiences in terms of assessments. But then when I got to upper high school, I was partnered with someone who I didn't really know, and then they sort of ghosted on me, and I had to do the whole assignment by myself. And so now I'm sort of skeptical about it, but I think it's good in the classroom. It's especially good in the classroom because you're hearing others' point of view or other students' ways of thinking. But yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, that's so great, and it covers those different aspects. Sally, what's your experience of group work, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I just got home. That's why I'm a little bit late. But my experience of group work, I've done a little bit of higher education before, and I've never had to do group work in that context. So I probably haven't experienced it since like high school or in like the classroom with like the younger years. So reading groups, and I'm in a composite class, so often we do like group work within like half the class, just to split levels of understanding. But yeah, that's about it. I haven't had a whole lot of assessments and things like that.
Yeah, this is a great introduction. It shows the challenge of working in groups, but also the potential, and it shows the value in teacher education, schoolwork, and it shows that we live in an individualistic society. That is, even when you work, you're going to be working with others in groups. There'll always be others around you, but at the same time, you're going to have to get things done individually as well. So a great deal of our thinking and teaching is done as individuals, but at the same time, a great deal is done in groups. That is, you work with other people. And so the dynamics of groups, team relationships, characteristics of groups, that can also be very useful in understanding how your class is going to go, and also beyond your class in the school itself. So if you've got 6 or 8 people organising an outdoor ed camp, there's going to be a group dynamic amongst the teachers, the parents. And we can extend this idea of group working with others to include non-personal interactions with resources that you're doing in your assignments. That is, you've got the writings of people, Martin Luther, John Wesley, you've got referencing of scholars, you've got peer reviews of material. So whenever you write an essay, you're actually doing group work in the essay, but this could be with dead people or people who live on the other side of the world. You're using textbooks, journals, podcasts, other resources. Interaction with other people can also be to the distant past, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, Apostle Paul, Moses. Scholarly and critical writing is enhanced by the number of scholars that you interact with. And so you can't personally meet with all of them, but you can read books by 20 different people when you write an assignment. And so in some ways, that's a little bit like group work. We can benefit from interactions with other people living at the same time, and we can balance all sorts of perspectives. So if you've got different social groups, if you've got different disciplines, you go to a mathematician, a sociologist, a psychologist, we can look for a diversity of viewpoints and skills. And if you're talking about Christian faith, you can go to a Presbyterian, Uniting Church, Baptist, all sorts of different groups could give you different opinions, and you can quickly find them these days on the internet. So we rarely think alone, but within the context and relationships with other people. So in the workplace, you're never going to do anything these days totally alone, perhaps. I could be wrong, but you're often going to be working with others. So decision making and thinking often interacts with others. Can I get you to write down what are some groups that influence your thinking? So I know for me, I've mixed with Pentecostals in a Pentecostal church. Possibly they influence my thinking. My parents and grandparents and family members are Anglicans, and so they go to a C of E church. And so there's possibly some influence from them. Some people have said it's C and D, Christmas and Easter people. And so there could be Baptists, or there could be other, so there could be church people that influence you. I guess there are 2 types of universities that I mix with. There are the secular universities. We have one here, University of Queensland is possibly a secular university, Griffith University. So I mix with some people from secular universities, but I mix with people from Alpha Crucis, who are a Christian university. And so this mixing with people from different universities influences me. Alex, what are some of the groups that influence your thinking? And it could be parents, it could be other groups that you mix with. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd definitely say parents. They influence me in terms of how I try and model my behavior, and because they're Christians, and then I guess my friends, they also influence the way that I think about things, as they're all Christians, and I've just grown up in that environment my whole life.
And that's going to lead us to realize that our thinking is swayed by them. That is, if they make a decision that you've got to vote a certain way, or you've got to eat a certain type of food, or drink a certain coffee with a certain milk in it, then we tend to be swayed by people around us. So it's important that we have self-understanding. And so if you go to a class and say everyone in your class must drink a certain coffee and put, I'm told that it was a certain type of milk. The new milk is oat milk. Has anyone come across oat milk in their coffee? I'm told that's the new thing that you must drink. So, so we do have these different influences on our thinking. During the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a resistance to thinking in groups. That is, group thinking was often thought of as back in the 1800s or so, and then we moved on and we became great individuals. And there's a certain Charles Darwin and social Darwinism and survival of the fittest and dog eat dog. And we have this idea that emerged of individualism. And then even in the 1950s and 60s, we had this idea that you could be a great individual, particularly the 60s. In the 1950s, it was more about family and tradition. And then when we moved into the 60s, you could be an individual. You could be a great individual. So we have this move from, and with this development of individualism, the idea is that if you try hard and do well, you could succeed as the great individual. Now, if you bring that into the classroom, we could have you encouraging students in maths. You could be top of the class. And so there could be an advantage encouraging the students to be top of the class in maths as an individual. That's quite different to encouraging the brighter students to work with slower students and a more cooperative approach. So you've got to think through your philosophy of education. Is it individualistic or is it community oriented? So in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, we then had a move from individualism and competition back to a greater cooperation and working together. Now, cultures are often listed as collectivist and individualist. So in the USA, in Australia, there could be a individualist culture, whereas in China, Korea, and Japan, it could be more collectivist. So traits of collectivism, you're not just doing things for yourself, you're doing it for your family, and the rules, bringing stability and order and obedience. Your family brings those. Alex, would you say, are you part of a more collectivist culture and family culture, or are you an individualist? What's the influence on you, Alex?
Yeah, I'm probably more collectivist. I think being the eldest child in my family is sort of contributes to that, as I feel like the younger siblings they understand more about their older siblings' experience. So yeah, probably collectivist.
Yeah. So certainly certain families, and I know when you mentioned family before, promotes a certain way of thinking, and this can be a collectivist approach, whereas in a truly Australian culture, in contrast to a collectivist culture, like China or Asia or Greece, in a individualistic culture like Canada and Australia, it could be and in a family there, it might be each person fights for themselves. Hands up anyone who comes from a more individualist family or more individualist culture, or are you all going to be collectivist? Can't see. Hands up those who come from a more collectivist culture. Yeah, Gabriella, what can you tell us about your collectivist culture influences?
I just think, I mean, it's not solely collectivist. Like, I think we obviously do have individual wants, needs, desires that we meet, but I think as a whole, my family is pretty collective in its just the way we live life, and I don't know, yeah.
And that can be partly a Christian approach. Is that as a Christian family, how does their Christian approach to life influence their collectivist approach? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I just think, I mean, I think the Christian way is that whole self-sacrificing, selfless way, which I think then connects into that whole collective thinking. I mean, obviously, as I said before, we have individual things that are at the forefront often of how we think, because we are selfish, I think, in that. But I think as Christians, often we want to serve each other and one another. I don't know.
Does your church group and family see selfishness as a sin, as something that's not healthy?
I think in different contexts, I think in terms of, if I'm trying to think of an example of something that's what's a lighthearted example? If I was to be, I can't, yes and no. I don't know.
Yeah. And I like what you say about the different contexts. So there would be times when a decision would be made. And of course, this will influence if you choose a school, study, if you choose a job. Do you think there'll be an influence on you from your family, or will it be an individual decision? Any thoughts? Because it's interesting, different cultures can have these different expectations. Now, this can contrast with some American and Australian individualistic societies, where they encourage every person to rough and tumble and stand out as an individual. We must remember that we have personality differences here as well. And these include the recognition that some students and teachers are going to be more individualistic, others are going to be more collectivist. And if you're in a certain position in your family, that may be the same. Some are going to be more task-oriented, some relation-oriented, some more grace-oriented, some more judgment-oriented. So there's going to be different personality types as well. Now, there's advantages in the group collectivist decision-making. One of the advantages is that you're going to have a diversity of viewpoints. So if at your school or in your class, you're going to allow for these different views, then that'll be useful. So when you engage the help of a number of people, you come up with lots of different ideas. Now, this is a bit like a tripod, where the legs of the tripod are a long way apart. If you've got someone, you're talking about views on God, and you've got someone who's a Catholic and someone who's a Buddhist and someone who's a Protestant, and you got these different viewpoints. The more different the viewpoints are, like a tripod, the more stable could be the decision that's made. And so this argument would be to bring lots of different views, as opposed to if you get everyone to agree, we're all charismatic Pentecostals or we're all Baptists. If you hold to one view, then there's said to be some lowering of stability there. Group decision-making promotes greater interest and participation. So if you've got a group whether it be a family or a school or a class, if the class make a decision, so you're going on an outing, you're going to have an excursion, and if the class all contribute in some way, we're going to go to Antarctica or something, and then because they've all contributed, they feel ownership. Now you can recognize there could be a false sense of ownership here. That is, you could tell the class they're all going to discuss what's happening, and then you could feed them ideas. Have you thought about? So it's not always representative. It can, in fact, be guided by you. I went to a church in New Zealand once, and it was a democratic church. There was no one on the platform, and Catholic Christian Fellowship, they would wait for God to speak to someone, and they'd get up and stand on the platform and lead a song or preach a little 5-minute message. And so it was entirely democratic involvement of everyone in the community. But I think it worked because the minister snuck around, Tom Marshall, and told people, you'd be good to do this. Oh, you've spoken too many times, give someone else a go. And so it was still said to be democratic, but was probably led by someone. So even if you don't have a group of experts on your team that can address every need, if you've got more people with more views and more expertise, that will work. Group decision-making creates greater understanding and ownership in the team, whether it be teachers or whether it be students. And then group decision-making creates an opportunity to create collective contributions from a variety of perspectives. So rather than just men and boys making decisions, if you've got girls, rather than just one age group, if you've got younger and older, then that gives you more viewpoints. Also, group decision-making takes advantage of relationship building. So as people discuss, and I think that's the big reason in education that we need group decision-making, is because we learn relational skills when you find that there are people who disagree with you. And so that's such an important skill, is to be able to relate well to others. And this creates a secondary advantage. The skills of each team member slowly transfer to the others in the group, so they don't just have the one skill, they develop more and more skills from the other people. Group decision-making promotes the idea that collective thinking is advantageous and beneficial. So it teaches and models the idea that groups are useful and helpful. Group decision-making can increase the strength of an organisation. So the more diverse people, you've got accountants and lawyers in a school or in a classroom, then you're going to have all of that expertise come in. Group decision-making allows a team to have less risks, because there's more people with more viewpoints can tell you what is risky, and therefore you can take more risky decisions because you've got more protection. Now, there's disadvantages the moment you do things as a group rather than individuals, and you might be able to think of some of these yourself, but some that we've noted are group decision-making process takes time. So rather than just the teacher saying, we're going on an excursion to this place, when you ask people, where do you think we should go? And you give people time to think about it, it could go on. And it could go on so long that you may never actually get there to making your decision. So every member of the group is going to add time. And so when you go from 10 to 20, it takes even longer. When you go from 20 to 100, it takes longer. When you go from 100 to 200, it takes longer still. So the more people you have in a group, then the more challenging it is. So for those who've just joined us, we're talking about the advantages and disadvantages of groups and group decision making. And we're realizing that thinking is often done in groups that has advantages and disadvantages. Now, you can receive irrelevant opinions and very wrong opinions and wrongly motivated opinions in a group. So if you've got 10 people, it could take you in 10 different directions, wanting to do 10 different things. So it's sometimes said that if you have a church or even a big group like the Australian people of 20-something million people, sometimes it's easier if you just have one person at the top who says what we should do. And so maybe we should let 23 million people have a say in where Australia goes. That's a challenge. So people bring ideas to the table based on their expertise. This has a strength, this has a limitation. Now, some people refuse to share their perspectives during group decision making, and they're shy, and some are even resistant. They just keep quiet because they don't want to go there. And so if you've got 50% of your people not wanting to participate in the group decision making, then that can create problems. Different people in a group can have different priorities. And so some might want to be social, and some might want to be academic, and some might want to aim for one age group or another group. And there's a strength in this, and there's a limitation in this. So the disadvantage of different priorities can limit choices instead of expanding them. And if one group dominates and one leader dominates, then that's where it'll all go. The choices of the group and its members can go against the outcome of the organisation. And for that reason, the key people in a school will often be appointed by the school board and by other key people because they don't want decisions that go against them. That's a weakness and a strength. Groups can reduce the amount of accountability that occurs. So if everyone thinks they're part of a group, they may not speak up when something goes wrong. So that's another problem. So group decision making can result in the overuse of the authority of the group. So the group can say, we made a decision as a group, therefore it's got to happen. Group decision making can cause everyone to see themselves as a leader, even though they don't have much power. And we've seen all of this in the last few days with elections and politics. People in a group can decide to go with the flow, so they don't really think, they're lazy, and they sit back and relax. So we're talking here about two ways of understanding thinking: individualism, collectivism, and in reality, both are needed. We're talking about two different types of culture: individualistic culture, everyone does it for themselves; collectivist culture, groups working together. And then the Apostle Paul in Corinthians talks about like the body. So if you look at the body, it has many cells. The Apostle Paul talks about the many parts, eyes and ears and parts of the body, they work together. So there's an analogy there. And individualism could be seen as the cancer, that is the individual that runs wild and that destroys. So individualism and collectivism. Why is there so much individualism in the USA, in Australia? It's part of the flow of history that we're in over the last 300 years or so, where some parts of the world, Korea, Japan, Greece, probably still in a collectivist world. So they're different. So teamwork is a particular way of working together so as to share ideas together. So if you've got a group that's working together, sometimes it helps to have a strong leader. But if you have that, then that may not be group work truly. It could be just one person dominating, whereas a team with shared leadership roles might be more a team. If you've got a group where every individual is accountable for what happens, that could be better than just a group where, say, the whole group is accountable. If you've got a group where they've got a purpose that aligns with the organisation mission, that could be different to where each team member differs. So there's differences between the way groups operate, teams operate, individuals operate, and you'll see this in your class, you'll see this in your school. There could be differences between groups and individuals. Now, as we said right at the beginning, there's nothing that leads to groans more amongst some students at some stage than talk of group work, particularly when it's being assessed. So a factor in different leadership styles, competition, it all gets challenged when you've got group work. But at the same time, we've got to learn to think in groups. We've got to recognise that we think in groups. There's a lot of advantages in groups, and classes work together. So here's the guy saying, it's less me and more of we. He's doing nothing. The others are all doing the work. And that's the problem with group work, isn't it? So working together, the challenge is, how do you do it? Has a great benefit. It's everyone thinking together. Has a great challenge because we like to work as individuals. So there are advantages and disadvantages there. Let me just mention here, has anyone come across Tuckman's model of group development? Hands up. So Tuckman said, Karen, what can you tell us about Tuckman's model of group development? He says that groups go really well for the first few weeks, and then after a few weeks or a month or so, you have a war and a storm. And then he says certain things happen. Karen, what can you tell us Tuckman's theory of what happens when groups operate?
I've been in it about twice properly for like an extended period of time, where I've had a large group. We started working great in like the first couple of days, and then we actually started to get to know each other, found out what we disagreed on, didn't really like each other, and that caused problems. And then eventually we started to sort of get accustomed to each other and figure out how to deal with our problems. And then we started to work together because we saw the actual, instead of seeing what everyone was holding back with the team, we started to see what everyone was putting towards the team and using our strengths. And then we actually started to perform properly and get everything done really well.
There's a very interesting theory that Tuckman puts together, is that you'll always be very polite at the beginning, and then as you recognize that you have differences, there'll be battles break out. You're an individualist, you're a communitarian, etc. However, according to theorists, even Piaget and others, this storming is useful because it tells you that there are different viewpoints out there. You see it in families. You've got brothers and sisters, there'll be plenty of storming. And then the solution to that is norms. So you got someone wants to stay up late, someone wants to go to bed early, the late person wants the telly on loud and full blare, the early bed person wants it all quiet. That's the storm. And then the norm is where you agree to the norm. So rather than going to bed at 7, rather than going to bed at 11, we make the norm 8:30 at night. Before that, you can have as much noise, but after that, no noise. So it's the writing down of the norms solves the storms. And so in your classroom, you say to the students, in the first week, you're going to all be angels. And then a month into the year, you're going to be battling with each other. You got polite students. You got students who speak politely to one another and gentle. And then you got students who rush about and push one another. And I've classified them as girls and boys. Now, is that sexist of me or not? But I was talking to a lady the other day who was running a preschool and kindergarten group. And she said that one year she had all girls and that was just quiet. And the next year she had all boys. And she said it was totally different. So I could be wrong there. But anyway, you've got storming, norming. So norming is the guidelines, and you're better off to put them in early and people know what the expectation is. And when the norming has been settled and the storms have been settled, then you start to perform and celebrate and go forward. So this is Tuckman's theory of norming and storming. Anytime you want to type that in. And interestingly, things are going well, then we pretend we're a team, but we're at war, then the team improves, and then we become in importance. So each step builds on the previous one, it develops through each stage, and then the storm is not as bad as you think. And Piaget says that's where learning is taking place. And then finally, we have the performing. Now you have to think about group size, because the bigger the group, the more challenges you'll have. Larger groups will have more non-participants than smaller groups. And so you've got to make decisions about that. It's going to be easier to get cooperation in smaller groups, perhaps. And each task you have is going to have different sizes. In general, if you assign students to groups rather than allowing to self-select, you'll get a nice mix Otherwise, if you self-select, you're going to get certain types of people all together. And don't just grade on the final product. Think about the process that's going through. And that way, if one student is going to be doing all the work, then they'll get the high grade. So think about that in group work. Increase accountability, not just on the final product, but on the way through. How many times did you meet? Who made the effort to get the group happening? So you give high grades then to people who initiate things happening in the group rather than just the result at the end. Start with positive feedback. So if they've got one class in the first 10 minutes or so, say this is working well. If they're going for 3 weeks, at the beginning, say this is working well. So build things up. Rather than allowing students to privately criticise the group, make it public feedback so that students have to, rather than underhand criticism, they have to build one another up. Allow time in class for group meetings. Make yourself accessible. Work with the groups. Don't try to squeeze learning time projects into a few weeks if you've not worked through the norming storming process. Teach student audience members how to meaningfully critique rather than run each other down. So in any class, there's going to be influences, and Piaget says this can be helpful. So all part of cognitive development is norming and storming, developing social skills relating to one another. And Vygotsky takes this further, and he says that knowledge is social and it's structured from cooperative efforts. And one of the things I've tried to point out here is that you are part of certain groups, and assignment 3 has looked at that. If you're from a Western culture, you've got a way of looking at things. If you're from an Indigenous culture, you've possibly got a different way of looking at it. From a Maori culture, different way of looking at it. And in each culture, you're learning ways of interacting which are influencing you for good or for not so good. I mean, even in terms of music, has anyone had this experience whereby you're told what music is acceptable and whether it's not so acceptable? I've gone along to a church group where they've encouraged everyone to bring along guitars, and you could be the worst guitarist in the world and bring along a mungo drums, and you could be the worst drummer in the world, but they would still celebrate you. And you could sing so far out of tune, but they would still celebrate you. So I've been along to churches like that, even the last couple of days. I've talked to people in churches like that. And then there are other churches that are perfectionist. You're never going to get there unless you're one of the top 10 singers or musicians in the entire universe. And so if you have that sort of experience, you realize that there are these different pressures on people and what is seen as doable and what is seen as valuable. Every group, I mean, I've been in churches where everyone has to be an evangelist, and we don't want any teachers or theologians because that is of zero value. Evangelism is the only thing that counts. And you know, go to some schools and it's only science that counts. Go to another school and it's only English that counts. It's so all around us there are group pressures on us, and that shapes what we think and do. So can I get everyone now to think about and write down what are some things, what stands out from this first class? So can I get you to write down what stands out from this first class on group thinking and teaching? The revelation that we think in groups, and when we teach, we have some responsibility to have group thinking. Or do we go back to the opening statements by 2 or 3 of you? Group thinking is dreadful. It is a bad experience. Just get wise now and go with the individualism. Yeah. Martha, what stood out to you in this first class?
I really liked the Tuckman's theory of group work.
Yeah.
Found that interesting, and I actually found myself considering that with your examples about bedtimes and stuff. I was actually thinking like maybe first year of marriage. Is that how that kind of looks? Like you get on really well, and then sometimes you start to know them, and I just thought that's kind of funny.
Yeah. There's so much dynamics going on in that first year of marriage. And you could even go back to the dating. And then you can meet someone for the first time and they're horrible. And then you can meet them. And by the third time, they are the most wonderful person in the world.
Just with that, my best friend in the whole world who I've been friends with since youth group days, the first time I met her, I just thought, oh, you are just so annoying and I do not like you at all. And she had the same opinion about me. And we are like bridesmaids at each other's weddings and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
And this also links with the opposites attract. And so there is a theory that if someone's spendthrift or if someone is shy, the one person they're most interested in dating is someone who's a bit party-like, because that brings them out of themselves and they can really enjoy the party-like in the other person. And someone who's party-like finds life's just a bit too fast. They'd like to slow down. And if they find the shy person, and so opposites can attract and get married. So that's quite fascinating. There's a group project going on there. And then Tuckman's theory is, as you say, that norming, storming, performing. And there are probably little cases of that through the marriage journey as well, is that, every months and years, you find this norming, storming, performing. And probably even in leadership, if you're got a leadership role in the school or in an organisation, you'll find there'll be certain storms, but the thing to do there is to keep calm, don't panic too much, and then work through what guides where we're wanting to go, and what are the norms that we can put into place. Yeah. Gabriella, what stood out to you?
I just liked what you were saying before about strategies that we can use as a teacher when we're aware just of all these different things of how group dynamics work. And I think just being aware of that, I just thought that was cool.
Yeah, and there's so much we can know about group dynamics. And I encourage you, if you've got a chance to buy a book on group dynamics, there's a few out there. And so it's worth having a bit of a look at strategies on group dynamics and how it all works. There's a lot written on it, and it's quite fascinating. It's quite interesting thoughts on it. Alex, what stood out to you?
Probably just the, I guess making it clear the advantages and disadvantages of group work. So that I guess we'll be able to keep that in mind when we're thinking about incorporating that into our lessons.
That's such a good point, that because you've got these advantages and disadvantages, when you bring a group project in, it's worth thinking through. This is what's going to benefit and work from the group, but these are the sort of things that are going to go wrong. And certainly the lazy option is the one to watch out for, is that some will think from the group project they can sit back and ride. And so you've got to watch out for the free riders there. So there'll be lots of things that'll go on. So I think the obvious solution is to give individual marks and then to give maybe a group mark. And so you might have 20% for the group mark, but you might have 80% for the individual mark. And that way, if you've got some way of measuring what's going on there with the individual mark and the group mark, then you'll be able to come up with some solutions to those advantages, disadvantages. Kieran, what stood out to you?
The Tuckman theory of group dynamics was really interesting going back to it, because I studied it for a bit in a leadership course that I was doing. And generally with that class, because it was a sort of like a 2-week live-in sort of thing, and there was a lot of stressful situations. And what I found interesting was when the entire group knows about the Tuckman theory of group dynamics and understands what the different stages are, identifying what stage you're in helps you work through your issues of, say, frustration or anger or annoyance with a certain person, and just understanding that this is going to pass and soon you're going to get into the norming and the performing stages.
And that's true of marriage too, where Martha was talking before, is that knowing that there's going to be these stages, it can be really helpful, that you're not in the battle forever, and there are reasons for the battle. And if people are tired, then the battle may arise, or if there's certain reasons for the battle, it may arise. So I think that's very, very useful as well.
Can I just say though, sorry, in that, because I'm guessing other than you, Sam, I'm the only one that's married. I don't want to scare you guys off. It's awesome being married.
So good, so good. So on that note, we'll take our 10-minute break, come back in 10 minutes to look more at group thinking and the advantages and challenges faced in group thinking. Thank you. See you shortly.